Howdy folks, welcome back for another Feature Friday. I'm your host Ryan Glover, and this week we're going to pick up where we left off last week discussing OAuth 2 by moving forward with the actual configuration of the integrations here inside of commands. So when we last met, what we were working on is learning how to do an actual connection to a third-party service using OAuth 2. So in this case what we used is GitHub. So what we'll notice is if I click connect here, we get redirected back to this page, but what technically just happened is behind the scenes we went over to GitHub and GitHub was checking to see, did you actually approve this application, meaning command, to get access to GitHub or your GitHub account, whichever one was currently logged in. And then if you did, or you clicked the approve button at that time, what was happening is GitHub redirects back to command with a special code included that we can use to go back and get an access token for that user's account. So if you don't remember that, definitely go back and check out the last video because I go pretty in depth on how all of that's working, and that will explain what I just said. So now that that part of this is complete, the next thing that we need to do is actually make this usable for the users of command. So what I'd like to do, and we're going to live code this, I haven't done any of this yet. What we're going to do is walk through the different state changes that I want to have in this UI. So ideally what happens is once you've actually connected, so we'll notice I click connect and I come back and it still says connect, which isn't what we want. So what I'd like to do is change the state of this button based on the value or the data that we have in the database for a given integration. And so I'm not sure if I mentioned this in the last video, but the way that integrations are stored, so when you click connect and go through that whole process of authenticating with the third-party service, what I'm doing is I'm storing the access token data for that service on your product in the database, so on the product object in the database. And so what we want to do is write some code that's going to check when this page loads, have we already connected to that service, and if we have, give us slightly different options over here on the right to say, oh, well, do you want to configure that service or do you want to disconnect that service if you no longer want it enabled? So what we need to do is walk through the process of writing that initial query, and depending on how time gets here, I may cut us off early and continue this next week, but what we're going to start with is going and writing that query. So what I want to do is jump over to the code, and this code right here, so this is our component that we're looking at here. This is our integrations list inside of command. And if you remember, the way that it's designed is that we have all the different services listed out, but they all share a common function called handle connect to service that just takes in their name, and then that tells me what URL to generate. So we have two functions right now. We have the GitHub one and the Twitter one. So that tells me which URL to generate as well as what service we're trying to log in with. And then once we have that URL, we just point the window to it, which that URL is saying, go log the user into the third-party service. And then all that hullabaloo is managed on the server. Again, check out that other video because it does go in depth on that. So once we have that, we get redirected back to this page. So what we're going to do on this component, so I keep saying page component, those words at least in my head are a little bit interchangeable. All pages inside of, at least inside of a pup-based application. So again, we're using the pup boilerplate that I've built for mentees at Clever Beagle to build commands. So I'm using the same exact tools I teach people on. And so inside of pup, React components are defined as three different types. So you have pages, layouts, and components. So pages are compositions of components. So in this case, we're looking at the, oh yikes, we're looking at the view product page component. And see, now I'm eating my own words. So technically this is the, what did I call it? Product settings integrations component. Yeah, so what we're doing is we're loading the view product page overall, but then we're on the settings component, and in the settings component we're rendering the product settings integrations component. How's that for nesting? So what we're going to do on this component, so product settings integrations, is down here we're going to wrap this with a query back to our GraphQL API to say, hey, we need to go check in the database, have you already connected these services? Depending on where we get with that, again, we might stretch this out over a couple or even a few videos here, depending on how this goes. So to get started, and I'm kind of back and forth on this. Sometimes I start with the client side, sometimes I start with the server. And in this case, I think I'm going to start with the server. So what I know is that in order to run this query, I need to actually be able to make it, which means that I need to, in my GraphQL schema, give myself a query that I can run. So in this case, I want to check and see if there's anything that's existing. So technically, we're already fetching back the product. So let's go to product queries. And I gotta be careful here because I don't want to, technically you want to try and make stuff as reusable as possible, but in some contexts it's not smart. So you want to do a little bit of duplication so that you don't create a bunch of spaghetti code. So in this case, what I'm doing is I'm looking at product and I'm saying, okay, well, can I reuse this? So what am I doing? I'm saying, check if there's a product ID, if this is public. Yeah, okay, so just looking at this, what this is telling me is this one is complex enough already, and so it's not wise to go back and just add more complexity to this. I certainly could. Technically, it wouldn't be too much. But I'd rather not bet on it. We'll put it that way. And this is the nice thing about code, is you can always refactor it. So if I decide later that the decision I'm about to make is wrong, I can always come back. And as product developers, it's very good to bake time in for that stuff. I don't really have a religious kind of way of doing it. I don't say like, okay, 1 week a month, I'm always refactoring. But it's more of a responsibility thing. So if I have a plate of features that I'm looking to develop and I get to a point where I'm like, there's a lot of messy stuff in here, or I see a lot of, so what I'll do for myself is I'll flag to-do messages. I'll say to-do, refactor this. If I see a lot of messages like that cropping up, I'll kind of hit pause on feature development and just go and take care of that stuff. So it is a matter of discipline, but getting into that matter of discipline is very good because it means that over time the quality of your product improves and you as a developer improve. So what I'm thinking here is, and this actually checks out because we can see here we've got product team, and that's how I was handling the team settings page here. So this kind of checks out. So what I'm going to do is just steal from this one. We're going to duplicate this. We're going to change this to product integrations. And what we need to do, and this is true, so we're going to leave our light security here. We're going to say, okay, you at least have to be logged in to access this data. And we're going to say, okay, we do want to find one product, and let's see what else. We do want to make sure you're the user ID. So in this case right now, my goal is to only limit changes to the settings to whoever the owner of the product is. So it's not extended out to like other admin users or something like that. It's just if you're the one that set up the product, you're the one that can configure it. And at least that's going to be the story for the beta release of command, and then later I might come back and change that. But for now, this is making sense. So we're going to say if we can find a product with the ID that you matched and you're the owner of it, so context user ID here is automatically provided inside of pup to all of my GraphQL resolvers. So that's just the logged in user. So if that logged in user's ID matches the user ID on the product alongside of the product ID, we're good. Go ahead and return that. And so now what we can see is we've also got some other stuff going on here. So this we can all get rid of. We're going to get rid of product, or this meteor users call inside of if product. And what we want to do is we need to get back, and this is something I like to do for myself just so I can start to think ahead. So I need to know what am I expecting back and what do I need to know. So technically speaking, all I really need to know are the names. Because this is all this query that we're writing right now is going to do is tell me, have they connected or not? I don't care about anything else right now. So what we can do is this. So we're going to say, we don't need the has access field. We do want user ID. So we're going to add to this. Now I'm going to have to black this out in the video here. Let me kind of do this carefully here. So we're going to pull up the database where I've got my actual access tokens. So I trust you folks, but I don't trust you folks. Trust everybody, just not the devil inside them. How about that? So we've got ULMROX as the ID of the product we're dealing with right at the bottom. Okay, so here in this I'm going to black out. So we've got our integrations object, and we can see that we've got the name of each service as a property on that integrations object. So what I'd like to do, all I need to know is, do those names exist? Because until they actually exist, meaning the user has connected them, they're not going to exist on this integrations object. So that immediately tells me whether or not they've actually connected it. So in this case, we just need the key value, GitHub or Twitter or whatever the other ones are that happen to be defined on this object. So back here in the code, what we can do is say, okay, we've got our product IDs ready, we've got our list of integrations on that product, and so now all I want to do is return product integrations. Now, what I'm going to do is check this. Let's see, on product mutations, we go into my new product action here. I don't believe that I initialize these with integrations. So, and this is a war story, soldier. So the reason that I'm doing this is because back here I'm saying I'm getting ready to write product.integrations.map. So what I'm doing is I'm expecting, no matter what, for a product to have at the very least, and actually I can't even do that. That's not the right way to do this. I'm trying to say object.keys product.integrations, and the reason I have to use that is because product.integrations is an object, not an array, and what we need to do is turn it into an array. So regardless, and let me go back before I forget, we need to set integrations to an empty object by default. So this is when somebody is creating a product for the first time, we're going to initialize the integrations as an object, and I believe as part of my onboarding too we do this, so let me check. Let's go in here, create a product, .so. Yes. Okay, and so this is a good time to just go back and check work that you've already done, make sure that it aligns with what's going on. And in this case it doesn't. So user ID, name, enable public roadmap, true, so we got to add that in here. Has access. Oh, I see what I'm up to. Okay, so this is just saying the other users that have access, so we should add that. So there's two different things going on here I should explain. So complete onboarding step is when you first sign up for Command, meaning you've never used it before, I take you through an onboarding process where one of the steps is creating your first product. So as part of that, I've separated off creating a product into this flow so that I don't have to call back to new product. And technically speaking, the onboarding existed before this did. So the difference is this is what you do when you're getting your account set up for the first time. This one is after you've created at least one product, I give you an option to create as many products as you want to track your work and monitor everything. So that's what this side of it is doing. So we have two, we kind of have some duplication, but it's the kind of duplication that feels real nice, put it that way. So what I'm going to do is say, okay, that one is correct. So this is when we're just creating a new product in general, and this one is when we are creating a new product as part of the onboarding. So what I'm doing again is setting default values for these fields, so that way later in other parts of our code we can expect those values to exist. So in this case, product.integrations might be empty. We don't know if they've connected anything yet, but if it's not, then we want to use the value. And as long as integrations is defined, we're going to have something that we can work with, as opposed to getting an undefined error. It's going to say, like, what are you talking about? I can't do that. So what's nice about this, again, is we only care about the name of the integration, or in this case, the key. So integration name. So here I'm saying object.keys product integration. So what this is doing is it's saying on the integrations object, give me all the key values, not the values, but the keys. So remember, we had integrations, and then the next level down we had the names of the integrations. So we had GitHub and Twitter as of right now. So GitHub and Twitter are the keys that are going to come back. So we're going to get those as an array as a result of calling this, and then we're going to map over that array saying, okay, all we really care about is, and actually I don't need to map anything. No, this does exactly what we want. Yeah, we're good. We're good. We don't need to do this because it's going to give me back. So what the end goal here is to get an array that looks like this, which this effectively is going to do because we're saying object.keys, which gives us an array with all the key names of the product integrations object. See, I'm kind of trying to convince myself here, like, is this right? And like, yes, this is right. So we should get back something that looks like that, which is awesome. And I think that'll do it for our query. So we've got at least our query resolver. So we're not quite done on the server, but this is getting us moving. So yeah, this is going to give us the list of integrations that are enabled if they exist, if we have a product, and if we don't have a product, just return an empty array. So what we're going to do is save that, and then I'm going to jump back to the API. So the thing to remember in GraphQL is that there are always three parts to defining a new piece of data, or three considerations you might have to make. That's a better way of saying it. So in this case, what did I just call this query? Product integrations. So I've been I'm behaving myself, and I'm doing this alphabetically, which is surprisingly difficult. So what we're saying is we want to get the product integrations, and we know, based on our query that we just wrote, or our resolver that we just wrote, we expect an arg of product ID, or an argument of product ID. So what I'm going to do here is say product ID needs to be an ID, and that's required, because if we don't have that, then we can't do anything. And I know we've covered this before, but to remind you, whatever we put after the colon here is going to be the shape of the data that GraphQL should expect in return. Meaning, whatever we return from this resolver, what we're trying to tell GraphQL is it's going to look like this, or it should look like this. So in this way, or in this file, that didn't come out. See, I'm burping. I'm sitting here. Getting old. Leave me be. All right, so in this file, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, when we query product integrations, we expect to get back. And this one's quite easy, so that's why I kind of stuttered when I was saying there's three different things that you have to do. So we just did two. So we're defining on our root query type, we're defining the possibility of this field product integrations to be queried. And then, so that's one. Two is back in our query resolvers, we have to actually define the function, or the resolver function that resolves that query. So that's two. And then three, and this depends on what you're doing. So we got lucky here in that we're just returning generic strings. We're not doing anything special. But you'll notice that some of these other ones, like the one right above it when you query product, we've got this thing, capital P product, which is representing a type. So in GraphQL, the third kind of leg here is you have types for all of your data. So your data is heavily typed. And if we jump over to product types real quick, we'll notice that types are explicitly stating the shape of the data that's being returned. Now, I say shape of the data, but what you'll notice is that types are defining objects inside of GraphQL, so the shape of an object. So in this case, a product has the possibility, or let's try and reword that. So the user who's querying, so meaning us, the developers, so whoever's querying from the client has the option of these fields to query from in relation to any field that returns this type, which is that's a clusterfuck. So the idea here is that if I'm going to query for a product and I know that it returns the product type, that means that when I ask for a product, I can ask back for specific attributes of that product or specific fields on that product. So here I can say, oh, I only want the ID and the name back. And as long as those appear in this type, and only appear in this type because that's what we've assigned as the return value for this field that we're querying, as long as those exist here, we're going to get those back from GraphQL. If they don't exist, so say somebody, I'll just kind of do a mock query here. So we'll say if we queried product on the client and we said a product ID is 123, and then we run our query on a different planet. So we run product, and then we're going to ask for some field back. So if we said ID, name, and then pizza, because pizza is not defined on the type, meaning the value that's being returned from that field, we're going to get an error. GraphQL is going to say cannot query field pizza on type product. So that's essentially what your types are doing. They're being very explicit about what data is available, which makes it both easier for us as developers on the back end, as well as most of us these days are wearing both hats of front end and back end developer. But if you kind of have a split team, it makes it very easy to communicate between the front end team and the back end team to say, hey, what can we actually ask for? Which is pretty nice. So back to our product integrations query, what we're doing is we're saying, okay, we only expect an array of strings. So in this case, capital S string is known as a scalar type inside of GraphQL. So that means it's like a, in regular JavaScript, you have primitive types. Same exact idea. So you have strings, arrays, objects. Don't send me hate mail, because I'm probably going to get this wrong. I know it's called primitive types in JavaScript, and in GraphQL it's scalar types, but these are the default types that are available. So it's something that's not custom. And in this case, we're just returning an array of strings, which is not custom. So what we've got at this point is we have our field that we can query, and we have our resolver that's actually going to resolve with some data from that query. So we don't need to worry about types. So at this point, we can technically run this back on the client. So what we're going to do is jump back to our product settings integrations component here. And up at the top, from the React Apollo package, so I've already got something being imported from this, but we're going to add. And I'm going to think ahead here a little bit. So compose is a function that's exported by React Apollo that allows you to compose together multiple GraphQL higher order components, or multiple GraphQL data containers. So the idea here is that with GraphQL, you have to explicitly state what you're trying to run. Meaning, are we running queries on this component? Are we running mutations on this component? And if we have more than one of those things, so more than one query or more than one mutation, or a mix of the two, then we have to compose those together, otherwise this won't really work. So what we need to do is, and it's because I'm using this with Apollo thing, which I may not need to do. Why did I do that? There was a reason. There was definitely a reason. I don't know. I'm not seeing it. I'm going to leave it for now because that's one of those things that usually bites me. If I delete it and I don't know why I'm deleting it. Yeah, we're going to keep that, but we might be able to phase that out later. So what I'm going to do is think ahead. And I'm going to say compose. And compose is a function that returns a function we can call. And that function that we can call expects us to pass a component. So in this case, this is essentially saying, compose, you're going to load all the stuff in between your parentheses, or what we're passing to you as arguments, and then you're going to pass the return values of those functions as props down to product settings integrations. So what we're going to do is say GraphQL, and we're going to not do that. Okay, so this is where I got stuck. And all this wrapping will drive you bananas. That should be okay. If not, though, we'll get yelled at pretty quick. So what we're saying is, okay, we're going to compose together all of these GraphQL containers. So we're not doing this now, but eventually I anticipate we'll have multiple GraphQL containers like that. So we want to compose together multiple GraphQL containers, and then we're going to get whatever those containers' return values are, which should be objects with a set of props, and then we're going to relay those props down to, technically in this case, with Apollo. With Apollo is going to take those props, combine it with the props that it returns, and then we're going to hand all of those props down to product settings integration. So we're getting this big bushel of props at the end of the day. That's all this is doing. So what we need to do now is take a break because Ryan needs a drink, and then we'll be right back. All right, and we're back. So now what we're going to do is finish wiring this up on the client. So what we need to do, or what we haven't done yet, is we haven't actually written a query from the client. So we've defined the field, so the possibility of something we can query on the server in our GraphQL schema, and we've written a resolver to resolve that possibility of us querying that field. But we haven't said how do we query it on the client. So what I'm going to do is go into so right now, just to make sure this is clear, there's a bunch of stuff in here at this point. So I'm in the UI directory at the root of pup, and inside of that I define a queries folder which has all of our GraphQL queries. So you have a file for each of the different types of data. This is just to make it easier on you for organization, because there's a lot of stuff potentially in a product that you're building. So what we're going to do is copy product team. How about that? And what we're going to do, and I just realized I might have burned myself, but maybe not, is we're going to say product integrations here, and our argument of product ID is already correct, so we don't have to worry about that. But I just realized we can't just say string here. It's not gonna let us do that. So this is actually a good opportunity for you to see how I do this. So what we'll do, so I have a backup plan just in case, but I want to see return scalar type from GraphQL resolver. And this is probably going to be a rabbit hole that we don't want to go down. No. Okay, so this is actually a good learning opportunity. So let's back up. Actually, no, I've done this before. I've done this before. I just don't remember because I don't do it often. So apparently OAuth services when I've done that. So we're going to do a little search in our repo here for OAuth services. Let's see here. We got to have a query somewhere. We do. Oh, word. I can get away with that. All right, never mind. Crisis aborted. So what we're going to do is just not pass back here in our GQL statement and ask for any fields. We're just going to get back what we asked for. You learn something every day. Apparently I learned that before, but I forgot it. So look at all the fruits you get from watching these videos. Okay, so now that is essentially defining us a query that we can run from the client. So what we're going to do back in our file here is go up to the top, and we can already see one query kind of going on. We got Twitter OAuth credentials query. Ah, okay. So that just explained why I was doing the with Apollo down here. And the reason why is that when I'm doing the Twitter connection, I have to run a query back to the server before I can send the user over to Twitter, because they're very fussy on how you make your request to do the initial authentication. So meaning where you redirect the user to a page and they have to click a button. Twitter's fussy about that. They use OAuth 1, which was slightly more convoluted than the OAuth 2 solution that we looked at last week. So in order to run a query programmatically, at least in the context of Apollo, I have to use with Apollo to pass me the client object, which has a query method where I can run a query programmatically. So that's why that was there. So what we're going to do now is just duplicate that, and then we're going to pull, what do we say? We said product integrations. And you'll notice that here what I do is I give myself the name of the query, but then I tell myself it's a query. And the reason why, and this will probably come out in a little bit here, is that we're going to use the name product integrations again, or the variable product integrations again, in a different context, and so we don't want to confuse ourselves or create any variable collisions. So we're going to work around that by just saying, okay, import this as the product integrations query, so we know exactly what it is. And all we're going to do is go flunk and paste it into there. So now, and our linter's just whining about syntax here, so we'll play nice for now, just so it's tidy. We're going to save that, and technically now we should be getting that query to run unless we have some silly errors that I'm not anticipating, and I'm not anticipating them, so rewind a little bit, which is, if we look at our query, we're expecting a product ID, which right now is coming from nowhere. So we gotta make sure it gets it. And if memory serves, let's see if that's true. Product, where's product coming from? Passed into get Twitter OAuth URL. Okay, so product is on the props, and we're passing the entire product for some reason instead of just the ID, but that's okay. So what we're going to do down here is we're going to not do that. We're going to add an options object, So we're going to say options. I'm going to return it with a function. You're probably like, what is all this gibberish? So what's going on here is the options object in Apollo. So this GraphQL function, again, is exported from Apollo. So when we return the options property, so here, what we're doing is we're configuring our query to run. So this is the actual query. So we're importing the query statement that we wrote here. But then right here, what we're doing is we're configuring that query. And one of the configurations is options. Don't let that confuse you, because that'll, yeah. So that options property is expecting to return an object, but it can also take a function if we need to grab something from the props that were passed down to the component that this GraphQL container is wrapping around, which in this case, that's what we're doing. We're wrapping or composing together the GraphQL container running this query with the product settings integrations component. So when product settings integrations is rendered, and this is back in another file, we might look at that, but this will give you enough information. So we're passing down a product from the database as a prop to this component. So here we're getting back all of the props that were passed, and I know that product is one. So what that allows us to do is say, okay, in the variables that we're passing to the query, which in this case are these, so we know we're expecting a product ID, so I'm going to say product ID, and then I'm just going to say product._ID. And so now, what that's doing is it's giving our query access to the product ID that it's trying to find the integrations for. So essentially it's matching those two up. So we're going to save that. And now we should be getting something back. So I'm going to say const data equals this.props. And then I'm going to counterintuitively log this.props. So if we go back over, make sure we don't have any query errors or anything. Let's see. Nice. So we get product. What am I looking for? I'm looking for data. Look at that. Product integrations, GitHub and Twitter. I was about to do a train whistle, but I'm not going to do a train whistle. I'm going to compose myself here. There we go. Got the train whistle. All right. So now what we need to do is utilize this data. And pretty much what I thought with this is turned into a longer video. So what I think we're going to do is change the UI based on this data, and then we're going to pause there. And then I'll be back next week with the next steps of this, which is actually configuring the individual integrations, and I can even teach you. So we'll do, see, what is that called in pool? Like you're calling your shot, calling my shot. I'm saying, like, okay, we're going to work on the GitHub one. We'll tie all that stuff together. So before we get there, we need to flip the state of this button based on this data we just got back. And we'll notice, let's pull that console back open, that what we're getting back, so again, and I kind of anticipated this, so data is what Apollo returns your query as unless you give it an explicit name. So in this case, we're saying data is where the data is being passed, and then product integrations here is the name of the query that we ran, and its value is what we returned from our resolver on the server. So we're saying, okay, data.productintegrations should contain our array of product integrations. So what we're going to do is say, we're going to say, I'll probably regret that, but existing integrations, and I'm going to use the lodash.get method to make this a little more stable. So we're going to pass data to that, and we're going to say, okay, so we're effectively saying this.props.data, but we're using destructuring here to say just pluck off data as a variable. So we're saying on that data object, we want to get back product integrations. And if for some reason it doesn't come back, which it may not, there's a lot of reasons for that, usually relating to loading speed of the client running its queries and all that jazz. Just in case it's not there, we're going to return an empty array because we know that's what we expect back. So let's import Lodash. Let's put that at the end of our import. So you'll notice I was kind of deliberate about that. So I've got my npm imports at the top, then I've got my meteor imports, then I've got my components, then I've got my queries and mutations. So that is not the gospel, so do not follow it, unless it makes sense to you, then go nuts. Okay, so we should have, and let's just see. So what I'll do is I'll just take the variable name here, make sure this little idea worked, and then what we're going to do is start to map over that. Yeah, this will probably end up being messy and I might refactor it, but we'll be able to do a rough version of what we're thinking about. So back to there we go. Existing integrations, GitHub, and Twitter. So why I said this might be messy is I've got a static or fixed list of the integrations right now, which isn't terribly conducive. You know what, why don't we just go ahead and refactor this together? You know, we may as well. We may as well, yeah. Okay, so we'll say handle render integrations. I'm just going to call it render integrations. Okay, and what we want to do is take one, let me make sure this is right. Yeah, so what we're effectively going to do is return for each one of our integrations. Return, cannot read property value, no. Well, guess what? Be quiet. So we're going to return a settings panel for each of our different integrations, which means, and this is one of those ones I'm making up on the fly. I kind of have a rough idea of what we're doing here, but I'll be able to explain it as I go. So what I'm trying to do is make it so that we're not repeating ourselves, essentially. We're saying don't rewrite all of this markup again and again, because the only thing that's really changing is the icon, the name of the integration, and the description of the integration. But everything else is identical. It's the same stuff. So what we can do is just tell ourselves, like, okay, well, what is the, so we'll say the name of the integration. So let's be smart about this. So we'll have an ID. So we know we have GitHub. The name is GitHub. Description. We'll have an icon. And then this is where I can get kind of smart, is I can say is enabled. And I know, so what we're going to do is we're going to move this chunk of stuff. Yeah, we're going to take that out of there. We're going to move this into render integrations, with the idea being that we can tell ourselves whether or not an integration already exists by saying, now this is a little, actually no, I'm not going to do that. I am going to do that, but I'm not going to do it in that way. There you go. That's a better way to say it. So now I'm going to quickly pull all of these. So hit that. And then we've got github.png. I've led myself astray. There we go. Alright, we'll do some formatting here to make this a little easier to duplicate. Yeah, of course you're going to whine about that. Why wouldn't you? So for now, what we're going to do, I'm just going to do GitHub and Twitter so we can speed this up. So Twitter, where'd it go? So I gotta sing to myself sometimes. Alright, then we're gonna do twitter.png. Cool. So now what we're gonna say is integrations.map. Now in this case we don't need any special logic or guarding or anything like that, because we know this array exists. We don't have to worry about it being dynamic in any way. So what we're gonna do, missing key prop. Well, hold your horses. So we're going to say the key. So this is the React key. So this is how it knows inside of a list of repeated elements which one is which. So we have to give it this key prop for itself, and React will say, oh, that one. So that's all we got to do for that. And then here we're going to say this is going to be the icon. And then we're going to give it the name. And then we're going to redo this stuff. So we got name there as well. And then we got description. Okay, so now this is what I was kind of debating here. And before I forget, let's do this. This is going to be the ID. So what I was debating is, okay, how do I know whether or not it's an existing integration? So I know it because I can just say this. So I can say the existing integrations index of, or no, I can be fancy here, but I always forget how to be fancy. So we'll say doodle, is it includes? I think we've done this before. Yeah, it includes. So we're going to say existing integrations includes our ID. Then we want to render one button, and if it doesn't, then we want to render the connect button. So what we're going to do is say like that. Say okay. Oh lordy, did I do that right or wrong? Somebody shouting at their screen like, you idiot. I did it right. This is just syntax highlighting. That's right. Okay, so now what we're going to do is say if it includes it, meaning it is enabled, it exists, I'm going to get rid of this click handler, but I'm going to say here disconnect. And I am going to have to do this slightly differently. So what I want to do is a split button. So on one half I want to have like a little gear icon for the configuration, and then on the other I'm going to have disconnect. But for now we'll just keep it to disconnect so we can kind of see this rocking and rolling. And then, and you know what, I just realized that this is going to be a terrible demo for you folks if we do it this way. So what I'm going to do, you can fast forward if you want. I'm sure some of you already put this on 2x or whatever you kids do nowadays because you're all impatient. All impatient. These damn smartphones getting everybody upset. Everybody's all a tizzy. Not .ping, .ping. We're going to do .png. Where is it? This goober. So the reason I'm doing this, to elaborate, is I want to show the difference between what it looks like when we have something and when we don't. Facebook. How could we ever forget Facebook? Huh? You never forget Facebook. Are you smiling today? Don't forget to smile. Somebody's calling the straight jackets on me right now. They're like, this guy's not doing okay. He's falling apart. And he records it, so there's evidence for court. All right. There we go. Okay. So now, doing this, we should be able to see, do we have a service or do we not? And if we don't, be able to connect it. If we do, just be able to remove it. And then I think that's going to do it for today. So we're going to say this render integrations. Let's see if I did it in one poll. Maybe I did, maybe I didn't. That'd be pretty cool if I did. One poll, what's up? Nice. So that's it. Or at least that's this part of it. So we can see that we do have GitHub and Twitter already included in our integrations. But MailChimp and Facebook we don't. So we get a different button. So now I know MailChimp's broken right now. Yeah, I actually completely disconnected it, so can't even get to it. But the idea being that if it were connected, we'd click and we'd go and do the whole OAuth process. With these, what we'll need to do next is make them disconnect. So again, we talked about the configuration split versus disconnect. So I think what I'll show you next week, we'll have to see. Again, it's a time thing here. I'll show you how to do the disconnect part at the very least, and if we can get to configure, I'll show you how to do the configuration pop-up that I have up in my noodle. So yeah, I think that's it. We're going to stop there because that was a lot of stuff to learn. And I have to be on my way for the day. So that's going to do it for me. So like always, if you haven't already, make sure to hit the subscribe button below. And if you like getting notifications for this stuff, hit the bell right next to that button, and then you'll get them in the little pop-up doodle in the top corner on YouTube when you log in. So that's going to do it, folks. Signing off for the HMS Beagle. I'll see you next week. You just listened to me run my mouth for the better part of an hour about a bunch of really technical code. So why not commemorate that experience by watching another tutorial and having an absolute psychological meltdown?